Hello, everybody. Good morning. Super happy to see returning and new names here on the list that we have. Super happy to have you back into Get Holiday Ready, Apinio's new videocast series. And for this episode, I am joined by the one and only Dr. Julia Vollstedt, part of our research consulting team. Julia, welcome to the webinar. First of all, I would just like to establish one thing. Dr. Julia, internally, we refer to her as Dr. J because she's our only Dr. J. So, can I be referring to you as Dr. J throughout this session?
Course, Hussein, thanks for the warm welcome, first and foremost. And this name, I mean, it has even permeated my friend circle. I mean, that's my whole personality by now.
Listen, you did the work and now you are Dr. J. Super, super happy to have you here. Usually, as usual, I mean, you've seen the previous webinars. I like to start by asking my guests and the people that are joining me here exactly why is it that we're doing these webinars and the importance behind the message that we're trying to send with why it's important to be holiday ready, why Q4 is an important time for you to know your research method. So maybe I'll just pass on this question to you. And Dr. J, why are we here?
Yeah, amazing, Hussein. I love that you are asking me this question, of course. I mean, ask a social scientist why research is important, and you will get a very long answer for sure. No, but in all honesty, I can only join my predecessors in stating that this is a great series because it gives marketers really all the essential tools that they need, all the way from target groups and pricing methods and campaign design, which is what we're going to talk about today. But I would also like to take the opportunity to take a bird's eye perspective and take a step back and talk a little bit about customer centricity. Have you heard about this term before? It's a bit of a buzzword, I think.
Of course we have,
Of
and we
course.
ran a whole webinar series about it with our CEO Max Hodish and Director of Research Louisa Leish. And customer centricity was a big, big part in what's hot in market research this year.
Amazing. Yeah, but maybe just for our audience, for those who haven't caught up on the series yet, just let me briefly explain. I mean, there are many definitions floating around, but at the end of the day, what it boils down to is an organization's ability to understand their customers' needs and expectations and to place the customer really at the center of its decisions and operations to create superior products and services. And so I think this is exactly what we're doing with this series. We are not only giving the marketing department the tools that they need, but we are also, I think, enabling organizations to take more of an organizational shift towards customer centricity because we know customer centric firms are more successful than those who are not customer centric. And in order to be customer centric, you need to know who your customer is. Who are they? What do they want? What motivates them? You need to know how you deliver superior value to your customers through your product offering. You need to know how to communicate with your customers. And you also need to know how to track the success of your campaigns
Of course.
and all of that. And so I think this is an amazing series because it really forces us to think more in terms of like customer centricity and through the lens of the customer. And I think this is so important, especially in Q4, because this is a very busy time for all of us. There's so many campaigns and amazing deals going on, special promotions. So that just means customers are so much more price sensitive on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fight for customers' attention is also so much more fierce. So that means there's an even greater need to really be spot on in terms of your campaign messaging and the way you just design your product offering.
Of course. And we talked about psychographics, how to identify your target group and exactly who your customer is. We talked about pricing to see how exactly are you gonna attract this target group and get it to buy your product. And I would say let's jump right into our session for today and talk about not all PR is good PR. What are we gonna talk about, Dr. J?
Yes, to kick off the session, I brought a little quote. We all love a quote. And this one is really famous. It's from John Wanamaker. Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. He said, the trouble is I don't know which half. And so John Wanamaker is a big marketing pro from the 19th century. He founded one of the first department stores in America. So he for sure knew a great deal about marketing and innovation. And even this dude really struggled apparently with knowing how to optimize his marketing. And this is maybe kind of surprising because 100 years ago, the only ways of advertising were mouth to mouth propaganda and ads in newspapers. And he already struggled. And I think this quote is just as true today as it was back then, especially because there are so many more channels now on which we can advertise.
So we're going to be talking all about advertising and how to advertise correctly for Q4. I'm super, super excited to go into the advertising research methods. For our audience, by now you should see on the right side of your screen, right here, I hope I'm pointing in the right direction this time around. You'll see that the Q&A option has already been open. You'll be able to send questions to Dr. J and I at any point during the chat, and we'll be able to answer them either as we're talking or we'll aggregate them to the end if they don't directly relate to the point we're making. You'll also see a poll section come up. And in here, when we have interactive elements, you'll be able to take part in our discussion and interact with some of the polls that we're going to have. So, Dr. J, let's kick it forward.
Yes, amazing. And yeah, so because so much money is spent on advertising, and we know that marketers are oftentimes still struggling with deciding how to design their campaigns and where to advertise, it's even more important to really test campaigns, because otherwise, what is happening is that we're basically taking a shot in the dark. If we're not testing our campaigns, we don't know how our target group will respond beforehand, and we know that advertising is really, really costly. And so basically, it's not spending your budget in the wisest way possible if you're not testing your campaigns before they launch.
Hmm. That's super interesting, but first of all, I love the drama. I love the backslide, a shot in the dark, the one spotlight. I live for this drama. But we talked a lot about the losses, right? That you could make these losses from these advertising, and what would that look like? I mean, we talk a lot in the abstract about them, but do we know what these losses actually are?
Yeah, we actually do. Thank you for asking that. Of course, I prepared the slide. Yeah, so we know that about 650 billion US dollars a year are spent on advertising. I can imagine that this number may even be higher by now. We know that of these ads, about 80% are untested, which, like,
Mhm.
as a reason that, I mean, my research heart is bleeding when I read that. And we know that those ads that are tested actually create about 20% higher brand uplift. So that means about $200 billion a year that we could generate in sales uplift are just left on the table, up for grabs, if we're not testing our ads. And I feel like this is so much money, especially, I mean, obviously, I do understand that there are some impediments to doing research. I mean, it does cost time. We know that many organizations are really hard pressed for time when designing their products and their campaigns, and maybe it feels like there's not extra time to take this necessary step. We also know that research um, does require some budget. However, if you see these numbers, you do realize that research actually only is a fraction of what you would spend on the actual campaign. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes it can also feel like maybe that marketers are a little bit lost in terms of how to set up the campaign and what skills and tools are needed. And I find it super understandable. I've spent years training in research, and you do require a specific skill set for that. But I think that's also where our mission with Opinio really ties in nicely, because in our view, everybody can be a market researcher, and we should really try to integrate research along the entire business life cycle to inform each and every step of the way,
Yeah,
because
I
making
think
the wrong decisions can be really costly.
exactly what I was about to say, and that was has been my motto in life recently because not knowing where my money keeps going to. But then I open Amazon and I realize exactly where my money's gone. But that's super interesting. I mean, we know all these losses are happening, and we know research can fix this. So I guess how can research fix this?
Yeah, thank you, Hussein. Another dramatic
On
slide.
point, on point. You know what? I
We
love
need
it.
So our mission is we need to test our ads, because we know that tested ads will win the hearts and minds of our customers. So the question is how we get there. And I totally like love your enthusiasm to dive right in. So, but there's one more thing that we need to settle first. And that's we need to talk about defining our campaign goals. And this is such, I know it seems maybe a little bit lame at first glance, but this is such an important step to take. This is a major learning from my time as a PhD student. Never ever start any research before writing down your research question and hypotheses. Otherwise, it's just a recipe for disaster. It will be a big mess. And I think this should be no different in practice. And let me explain why that is. So, I mean, ultimately, our goal is to sell our products and services to the customer. So that's maybe why it also seems super straightforward. Yeah, obviously, we want our campaign to achieve that. However, once we really think about it, we realize that not all campaigns are created equal. So that means there can be huge differences between campaigns. And I brought this little table to illustrate that. I mean, there are obviously many more different campaign goals just to illustrate the point. I mean, some campaigns maybe aim to increase brand awareness. With others, we want to perhaps reposition our brand and appear as more environmentally friendly, or whatever your goal is, or maybe have a specific promotion for a product or service. And obviously, these differ, and depending on our goal, what it is that we want to achieve with our campaign, also our visuals and campaign needs to differ. So the goal informs the campaign design, and that also informs our research design. And that's with the blue box typically where my colleagues and me come in. So if we assume that our goal is increasing brand awareness, obviously this will inform the target group. It won't make sense to ask people who already know and purchase our brand, right? So we need to define the target group more broadly, just in terms of category users. This will also influence what kinds of KPIs we're measuring during our campaign test. So if it's more about brand awareness, maybe aided and unaided ad recall would be nice to measure whether our ad is perceived as unique and whether our ad will lead to people like our brand and included in their consideration set eventually. And something that I also included here is the hard KPIs.
Mhm.
And yeah, this maybe also goes back to an earlier point that I made. I mean, there are so many things that we can track nowadays that it's also a little bit easy to get lost with all the data and all the statistics. And that's also why I think it's important, even if this is not something that we as a Pinio would typically look at, there are other agencies who can help out with that, to also look at these hard KPIs, like how many people have seen will see your ad, how many unique customers will you reach, how is your brand being talked about, and think about this beforehand. I mean, sometimes it's possible to retrieve this information after the campaign has been run. However, if this is not possible, then you won't have any benchmark. So it's really important also to think in terms of pre and post test with these things.
I really, really agree with you so much. And I think research design and being able to have this goal in the beginning and designing a research and understanding why you're doing a research, I feel like is a very important step. And if the people listening here are interested in learning more how to design that, we also have a webinar on research design with market research basics. And you're free to watch that. And we go through methods such as the SMART methods to be specific, measurable, realistic, etc., where you can learn how to really sit down and write good research design. But Dr. J, this is a whole other topic on its own, right? It's a big topic. It's a lot to sort of take in. What's sort of the most important thing about it, or what should we keep from it?
Yeah, very good point,
Mm-hmm.
Hussein. I mean, it's really a lot to think about. I
Mm-hmm.
agree, and it can seem a little bit overwhelming. I think the most important thing is just ask yourself, like, what would you like to find out ideally from the research? Just write down your campaign goal with all the KPIs. I mean, there are also like other expert agencies that can guide you on this. But like as a customer, you need to know what it is that you need to get out of the campaign, and also make sure to communicate this to your agencies, because we cannot help you if we don't know your goals. So this is also one of the first things that I try to ask our customers when I take on a project, just because this is such a crucial step.
Yeah, and I think there's a very quote here, and I'm gonna put you on the spot. But because I remember when I was talking about my time as a PhD student, and then we were talking about your time as a PhD student, there's a very specific quote from one of your professors in the research labs, right? So can I put you on the spot and
Oh,
have you share it
yeah.
with the world?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yes, so my professors, we would always have these lab meetings for lunch, right? And then we would talk about our research. And I mean, it's also very daunting if there are like all these professors and you need to present your stuff. And then they would always say, like, yeah, you need to specify all these things beforehand because otherwise it's a garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. Yeah, you cannot expect to have a great research with great results if you didn't put enough thought into it beforehand.
So how do we put the thought into it? Let's dive right in.
Yes, I think we've already taken the first step. So, what I
Mhm.
would like to do now, I mean, this has been all like super abstract, and I think now is the perfect time to make it a little bit more practical again. So, from following the first two episodes, I know that we've been talking a lot about our streaming provider and that you're a big fan of Christmas movies, Hussein. As it
Listen,
happens, I am too. That's why I love this example so much. I can't wait for them like to be online again and really get into the Christmas mood. But I have to say, I need to wait until end of November. Otherwise, it's too early.
it's still Halloween.
Yeah, but I'm also a little Christmas elf. I'll admit to that. So I thought after I've like guided you through all of the campaign goals, maybe you can state what yeah the research goal of our client the streaming provider would be and put your knowledge to the test. Now I'm putting you on the spot actually.
I find it very very fun to see how this one thing I told Gabriela in confidence about how I like Christmas movies has turned into the entire world knowing Christmas movies. Some of my clients are sending me Christmas movie recommendations now, so that was hilarious.
Oh, I
Of course, I'd be happy to reiterate the goal that we have here. Basically, our streaming provider here offers a big range of like Christmas movies, because they observed previously in previous years that Christmas movies are a big pull factor of people bringing in new clients. So the goal of our client, or the client that we've been working with in this series, is to basically understand and create awareness for the wide offering of Christmas movies among the users of the streaming service.
Yeah, amazing. That's amazing goal. So
That's my smart objective.
that's your and we have it here. So it's basically creating awareness amongst users of streaming services. Great. So we've completed step one and we can continue. So now it gets way more fun and we can actually move on to the campaign design. And this is typically something that we're also not really involved in as a research agency. Well, sometimes clients do that and send us different design routes that they have, and they ask for our advice in terms of which one we think they should test and so on. And we gladly give our advice, of course. And I think this step in particular should also be guided by research. And that goes back to what Gabriela was talking about in session one. So we need to have a very good understanding of who our target group is and how we can talk to them. And we need to make sure that our campaigns are like really speaking the right language. And that's where I would like to make a little bit of an excursion into psychographics again without going into too much detail. I know I mean, we can define our target group in terms of sociodemographics and say, like, okay, we know that males in their late 20s with dark hair working at a Pinio and living in Hamburg.
You're
Uh,
getting too specific there, Dr. J.
yes, that they are like part of our target group. But maybe that doesn't really help us in terms of like really predicting behavior because as it happens I don't fall into this target group but I also like Christmas movies, you know, and that's where the psychographics come into play. So from research we just know that people's underlying motives and attitudes are way better predictors of behavior. There are three different motives: power, achievement, and affiliation, and three different attitudes that influence how people yeah make decisions, but also to what kinds of arguments they are more susceptible to, and that's affective, cognitive, and cognitive. And if we cross these with each other, we get a lovely 3 by 3 matrix grid with 9 distinct segments that we can target. And all of these are susceptible to different types of arguments, they have different motivations. And if we know what really drives these people, we can also design our campaigns in that way. So just continuing with the refresher. So what we usually do with the psychographics, we will correlate them with affinity for like the product or the brand that we are interested in. And then we can see which segments would be the easiest to convert for us. So here we see, this is dummy data, by the way. So here we see the streaming market overall again, and we see that there's the highest activation in the power column. So really the rational power people and the action power people. And then we see our brand and a fictitious competitor brand on the right. And if we compare our brand to the overall market, then we see that our brand has the strongest activation with the action achievement segment, and also a little bit of activation with the action power segment. And this is actually super interesting because here we see that there's high affinity in the market overall, but this seems to be a segment that we are not really targeting yet. So I think this could be really nice as a campaign goal for us to design our stimuli such that we are really talking to the action power people, especially because this seems to be a segment that doesn't show a lot of affinity to our competitors' brand yet. So what do you think about that, Hussein?
I think that we're ready to jump right into our case study. I think that's super, super nice.
Yes, let's do it. And you're kind of the spokesperson of our streaming provider, I feel. So you share these visuals with me, which the design agency came up. So
Hmm.
there's like the first route, also with like a call to action or like motto for the campaign: escape the family chaos, stream your holiday joy. I feel like this ad is really talking to me, by the way. Love to escape the family chaos as well.
I've never been this happy sharing the remote with someone. I'll tell you that much.
I love it. And then there's the second route where we see like the family being super cozy, and this is really about watching together. And I think what would be really fun at this point
Hmm.
would be having a little interactive element and asking our audience what they think, which visual would, be more appealing to our action power segment.
Okay, so we have the action power segment, and we're gonna have a poll come up now on the screen, so our participants can go ahead and say what they think. Which one do you think our action powered people are gonna be into? And I always really, really like these exercises
Yeah,
because
me
they
too.
really allow us to like sort of see where our participants are in their thinking. And I think in the previous webinars, it helps us also from these interactive elements sort of tailor the webinar content also based on the knowledge that we currently have. So I'm a
Yeah,
big, big fan um,
totally.
of these things, and the poll should be coming up now any second. There we go.
You
There
know
it
what?
is.
I also always do that for myself. Like
Yeah.
sometimes if I do a campaign test for a client, I always have my own hypothesis on which visual I think will be more appealing to the target group. And I think it's always very humbling because sometimes I'm right, but also more often than not, I'm actually wrong. And that also just underlies how important it is not to go with n equals one, but really source the power of the crowd. But now I'm super curious what our audience thinks. Oh, okay.
Nice.
It's a very clear key visual one. Yeah,
Hmm.
to be honest, I think our audience has already learned a lot from Gabriela in the previous session. I mean, the guy and the couple like fighting for the remote control. If that doesn't scream, I need to have the last word and I need to be in control, then I don't know what would. So I agree that this should probably be super successful with this segment. And on the other side, we see more, like the affiliation theme coming through with the togetherness of the family, and it's super cozy.
Okay, so how do we test these things? Let's move on, I say.
Yes, let's do it. So now we can finally talk about my favorite things: experimental research designs and multivariate testing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm hosting this webinar. I think there is a correlation. I really like these methods. So, what we will do first is dive into A B testing because it's kind of the gold standard of ad testing. Although, to be honest, it's not really like a quantitative method, but a research design, to
Hmm.
be very precise here. And then we will also talk about multivariate testing afterwards. So, let's dive right in. A B testing, what is it about? Basically, what we're doing with A/B testing is running an experiment. We have our questionnaire, we have our KPIs, we know what we want to ask participants. And then what we are going to do is we will expose them to our stimuli, which is like akin to a manipulation. So these will be our visuals. So there's visual one, there's visual two. And then the idea is to compare these two groups with each other and see which visuals is superior in terms of our KPIs. So which one will lead to higher brand liking, which will be perceived as more unique, and so on and so forth. So with A/B testing or also split testing, that's just another name for it. There are two different ways to go about it. The first is monadic testing. So with monadic testing, like you can see here, we will basically have two groups of people, and every group will just evaluate one of the visuals.
Hmm.
So they are not even aware of the fact that they are living in a world where another visual could exist. They just think this is the only one, and they will evaluate it. And then the second way to go about it is semi-monadic testing. So with semi-monadic testing, you just have one group of participants and everyone evaluates everything. So you would first show them visual one, and then they respond to the questions, and then visual two. And usually we will do this in random order to avoid ordering effects here. So now I would like to involve the audience again and hear what our audience thinks is the most appropriate way to go about this campaign test. Should we use monadic
Oh,
testing or semi-monadic testing? This is an
that's
interesting one.
it's a difficult one as well, but I see what you did there. I see what you did there with that question. Don't fall into Dr. J's trap, everybody.
It's a bit, yeah, it's a bit of a sneaky question, to be honest.
Dr. J is out to get you. Be careful.
Ooh, oh, yeah, and we
Ah.
can see this is a lot less. I mean, the other one was just a warm-up question, to be honest. Now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, 57% monadic and 42% semi-monadic. So our audience is divided, and I can understand why, to be honest. Both methods or both ways could really work here. However, I have a strong preference for monadic testing in this case, and I will
Mhm.
explain why. So, with monadic testing, we just have the possibility to really get an in depth evaluation across a range of KPIs just because we are only showing one visual at a time. I mean, depending on how long your questionnaire is, you have to just multiply it by the number of visuals that you have. This is just very taxing for participants. We don't recommend it because the more questions you ask, the more visuals you show, it will get harder and harder for participants to be super discerning and really state the differences. Also, with concepts that are very different and maybe a little bit more complex to understand. For instance, also if you have a spot test or a video that is a little bit longer to watch, I think monadic testing is the way to go, just because it's a super clean setup. And participants will also not get influenced if by another visual that they will have seen before. However, I also need to admit, I mean, you will need twice as many participants, so this could be a potential disadvantage if you have a target group that is a little bit hard to reach.
Yeah, no.
And then for semi-monadic testing, I mean, you guessed it, it's kind of the opposite is the case. Semi-monadic testing is more appropriate if you have more stimuli that you want to test, maybe 5 to 7, and you're just happy with only having 2 to 3 KPIs tops. And if the concepts are also super easy to understand and also maybe more similar, like we see here. I mean, here it really would make sense to have the side by side kind of comparison.
I mean, it almost seems to me that we should, or the recommendation here would be to go for monadic testings because it would be cleaner. We can ask more KPIs, or what would you say, like to something, a statement like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think in most cases, I tend to agree. I'm more of a fan of monadic testing. However, I think that there are very specific situations when semi monadic testing can actually also make a lot of sense. And that would be, for instance, very early in the campaign design process. If you just have a bunch of ideas that you would like to run by the panel, just very crudely written out and not very specific yet. And then just ask a bunch of KPIs like liking, attractiveness, stickiness, uniqueness, whatever you're interested in, because that could help you to really narrow it down to a smaller selection. And then you could come back and do that in a monadic test, for instance, and
Mhm.
really do the deep dive then.
I definitely agree. I think we just got a question in the Q&A segment from one of our audience member, and I think it's super, super interesting, and it goes into exactly the discussion we were having, you and I, just now. And I'm going to ask the amazing Zena from the marketing team to pull it up. Always two steps ahead, Zena. Never doubt you. Would it be recommended to run multiple tests on the same ad? And I think that's a super crucial question. Dr. J, what's your take?
Yeah, so I'm always a fan of running several pieces of research. However, well, with the same ads, I'm not sure. Like I said, I mean,
Mhm.
it would make a lot of sense to maybe pre-test your idea, and then you can refine the idea, and then you come back, and once you've really developed your campaign, you can test the campaign. So it wouldn't really be the same ad in that sense, like the same
Mhm.
same. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, and that is not an effective use of budget. But you can still test different versions of the same idea in different stages of development. Let's
Mhm.
put it that way. And I think an advantage of that would be that you don't get too attached to your own ideas, especially when we're creative. We know we can be really, I mean, that was always the case for me with my own research. And then I would get critical feedback. And I was like, no, I've already run these experiments and I've been super attached to this. Don't crush my dream, you know? Yeah, it is what it is. But if you test early on, you just filter through the ideas that are maybe less successful and you avoid spending too much time and budget on perfecting campaign ideas where you could maybe have known from the beginning that they are less successful with your target group. So I think
Nice.
that's why it's very good to run multiple tests.
No. So do we have results, Dr. J? Do we have graphs? Do we have something to show for the study that we just ran?
Yes, of course
Ooh.
we do. Let's take a look at results. So, just one thing that I also want to mention here, A/B testing is like the chameleon of research. That's what I
Mhm.
love about this. Any method or any question type, you can always integrate it into A/B testing. And here are just some different question types that you would usually find in an A/B test. So there could be flash tests, for instance, where you're just very briefly showing your visual, and with that, you can test whether or not participants are able to quickly recognize the
Mhm.
stimuli and identify the right brand and things like that. Heat maps are also really nice if you want to test if a specific element of your design really pops. Really draws attention of participants. Open text is also great because participants oftentimes have really good ideas also to refine the campaigns further in the next iteration, and they give really nice feedback. And then obviously also scales like Likert scales, and we can also tap into participants' perceptions and include some brand statements and things like that.
Nice.
However, yeah, this is would be a lot to look into within the scope of this seminar. So that's why we're only focusing on brand liking for now. So how
Mhm.
this would usually work is we would have separate surveys, one for the first visual, one for the second visual. Once we ran those, we will put them together. And then how you analyze the data is by performing splits. And that's what you can see here. So we've split the
Amazing.
brand liking by the type of visual that participants saw. And as you can see, you kind of
Doesn't look good.
you can see nothing. Yeah, that's what sehen
Yeah.
Sie, sehen Sie nichts, we would say in German. Yes. So the thing is, I mean, we could have also shown the means maybe and perhaps run a t-test that could have made it a little bit easier to discern which image is the winner. However, it's really clear here that we don't have a clear winner. And
Mhm.
that's, of course, not really helpful right now to our streaming service provider.
So what will we do in this case? What happens?
What happens? Actually, this is a case that happens relatively frequently in
Mhm.
monetic testing. So, I mean, we could draw the conclusion that, oh, perhaps we're lucky, and both visuals are really appealing. Um, I don't encourage to draw that conclusion directly. I think we should explore a little further. So, what I would do first is then look at all the other KPIs and see if this is a pattern that persists. I mean, because sometimes it can be that on some KPIs, one image is more successful than the other. However, let's assume that we will see this pattern persistently. I think that's the prime example that there could be a moderator at work. So, what
Mhm.
is a moderator? A moderator is another variable which can influence the relationship between two variables. So, in our case, we have the visuals and they will influence brand liking. And then for some people, visual one will lead to more brand liking than visual two, or vice versa. And the variable that determines that, that is our moderator.
Mhm.
And you can already guess what will happen next. I will bring it back to psychographics, of course, because these are our moderator in this case. If we correlate brand liking with the psychographic patterns, then we see a way more nuanced picture, and we can see that, like our audience predicted, the action power segment has way higher brand
Yeah.
liking with the first visual, whereas the emotion affiliation segment will respond way more to the second visual. So these are almost diametrically opposed, which I think is super interesting. And yeah, this is something that we frequently observe when moderating variables are at play. If
Mhm.
one group particularly likes one visual but not the other one, and the other group exactly mirrors that, then both effects will
Mhm.
completely cancel each other out. And that's the reason why you don't see any movement on your main KPI at the aggregate level. So that's also why it's important to think a little bit about these potential moderators when you're setting up the experiment. Um, the usual suspects would be something like brand awareness or purchase, or also previous usage behavior that you could just measure, just in case you do not find these differences, to be able to explore the data a little bit further.
I find it also super interesting that um, we were able to basically unlock a piece of information we weren't even thinking about, right? I mean, we weren't even talking about the emotional affiliation people, but then after seeing, okay, why do we have such similar results, we were able to see. And that's always something about research that still amazes me till this very day.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's such a great observation, because based on our knowledge of psychographics, we could have totally predicted this.
Hmm.
And this just also shows how important it is to get creative agencies on board when you're working with psychographic target groups. And that's actually what a big FMCG client in the food industry of ours did together with Louise, our captain of research. They hosted a several-day consecutive workshop with the client and the creative agencies to really put all this theoretical and mathematical psychographic target groups to practice. And that's just something that warms my heart as a researcher, because oftentimes research seems very dry and not really easy to apply. But I think with these psychographics and now with the campaign test, it really does come to life and it shows how you can work with it.
All right, so that's A/B testing.
Yes, that's A/B testing. Let's move on. So with A/B testing, we are working with these comparisons, right? So it's super helpful to determine which visual or what visual really has the biggest impact on our KPIs. However, A/B testing and the way we are doing it now is not the most useful to understand which factors of the campaign are actually driving the brand liking. So we don't
Mhm.
get deeper insights as to the how and why. And I will elaborate a little bit more on what that means. And that's why multivariate testing can be super useful with campaign testing as well. And to be honest, it's not the most obvious use case for multivariate testing, but some of our clients do it. And I think it's a great addition to A/B testing. But maybe let's just bring it back to A/B testing and experimental research for one more second. So the thing is, with A/B testing, I told you we're basically running an experiment, and we have our brand liking, that's our dependent variable, and there will be variation in brand liking. So some people will like our brand, some people will not like our brand as much. And because the only thing we are changing in our experiment is the visual, we can tell that visual one creates more to brand liking, contributes more to brand liking than visual two. And if we look at these two visuals, for instance, we see that they are super similar. There's people on the sofa, they're facing the camera, there's the Christmas decoration, and then there's the guy holding the remote control, right? So we can carefully deduced that it's probably the family versus the couple, that's the aspect that will drive brand liking for our target group. However, if our ads look a little bit different and more like this, it's not that easy to draw this conclusion anymore because a
Mm,
lot of things have changed. I mean,
mhm.
now it's like the family, there's no one holding the remote control and being in charge. It's a completely different color scheme. They're not facing the camera, they're with their backs to the camera. So it's really difficult to discern which element caused this uplift in brand attractiveness.
This seems like a problem.
Well, the
I
way I was
smell trouble.
yeah, trouble. Um, well, not necessarily. I
Mhm.
mean, if we just want to compare the ads and know who the winner is, and we can do that, and then it's done, that's then and that, and there's no problem with that. However, it doesn't necessarily give us a deeper understanding of why the specific ad performed better or which elements we need to include to really drive up the brand liking. I mean, this is only something that we can achieve with experimental designs if we very methodically vary these pictures. So ideally, you would only change one element at a time. However, this is not really feasible in terms of time and budget, and that's, I think, where multivariate techniques like A/B, like multivariate testing, um, add a lot of value. So what we are doing with multivariate testing is we have all these campaign elements, and with those we can predict which one of them contributes most to brand liking. So what drives up the variation in our dependent variable. And the statistical analysis that we use for multivariate testing is key driver analysis. So let me just briefly explain what key driver analysis is. It's a statistical analysis, like I already said, that measures the relative importance of potential influencing factors, that would be our campaign elements, in predicting the outcome variable, that would be brand liking, right?
I'm hoping we're gonna unpack this.
I know key driver
Is
analysis is a relatively abstract method. So I just asked the audience to bear with me for a second because I think it will make a lot more sense in a few minutes. So, like we already said, there's the dependent variable or outcome variable, which is brand attractiveness. Some people will like the brand, some people won't like the brand. And then we want to understand what drives people towards finding the brand more attractive. So, in statistical terms, we would say, how can we explain the variance in this variable? And our independent or predictor variables are our campaign elements. So these are things that we can just measure, right? So this is, for instance, is there a cozy vibe or atmosphere? Can I relate to the protagonist in the ad? All these things. And then what we will do is we will run a statistical model to see which of these elements has the highest contribution to brand liking. So
Okay, not really. Still, too obvious. Why are we
you're not
using?
sold on this, I can tell.
Not. Why are we using a statistical model? If I mean, I could just ask participants, right? Which elements did you find more appealing, right? Um,
Really. Yes, I
why?
agree with you. So first of all, obviously this is a statistical model. That means we will get a more objective interpretation than with
Mhm.
descriptive statistics. I mean, you could already tell when we looked at the split earlier with the brand liking, we were debating a little bit what it means. And with modeling, it's just clearer. Also, what is really nice here is that you will get a very clear prioritization of the elements. I mean, if you ask glycad statements in a matrix question, or if you maybe run a mux diff, you will get information on the relative importance of these items and the absolute importance, but you will not get both at the same time. And this
Yeah.
is something that KDA can do. It can really clearly explain that maybe a protagonist that is in charge is way more important than having a cozy atmosphere in the picture. But what I find the most important of all is the identification of hidden relationships. So if I just measure to what extent do you agree that there is a cozy atmosphere, that there's a festive mood, that this ad fits the brand, it's almost like an attention or manipulation check. I just check, do people understand what they see? And this is, I mean, a good thing to test in any campaign test because you want to ensure that people understand your ad. But just because I say, yes, this ad shows a cozy atmosphere, it doesn't mean that the fact that there is a cozy atmosphere would lead me to like the brand or the ad more. You see what I'm getting at? So
Hmm.
there's not necessarily a linear relationship between these descriptive uh, statistics and the actual dependent variable that we're looking at. And this is something that we can only do with modeling.
Yeah, and how do we implement this in a campaign test?
Yes, luckily it's super easy to implement in a campaign test. So what we would do is what you have seen on the previous slide. We just measure the campaign elements and to what extent participants agree that they are there. And then the model will do all the heavy lifting for us. And maybe that's also a reason why it's not that frequently integrated into campaigns, because we cannot have this in our dashboard, right? This is something that our research consultants would need to do in a second step. So here I brought the output for
Hmm.
you. So on the left side, you have this little pie chart, and it says how much of the variance in the dependent variable is explained. So we know that with all the variables that we put into our model, we can explain a bit more than a third of why people like or dislike the brand. And that's actually already pretty good. And then on the right side, you see the bar charts, and that shows of these 36% that we are explaining how much each of the different campaign elements contributes to the explained variance. So,
Hmm.
Hussein, I need to ask you to help me out a little bit because this is really small for me at the moment. So, on top,
uh,
there's like the seasonal content. And yeah, so
yeah, we can see the first one being the seasonal content availability, followed
right.
by limited time offers or discount. Actually, the second one
Yeah,
is the personalized content. Fourth one is then exclusive holiday
great.
deals, and then followed by subscriptions, family and togetherness,
Okay.
feel good, festive,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
Okay. Thank you so much for helping out. I mean, I already have glasses, but it's not that big. Yeah, so here you can see that it can also be super helpful to include other elements, not only things that are really related to the design of the visual itself, but also other elements of the campaign, like that something is only seasonally available. And you will see
Mhm.
that, okay, all these things have a bigger impact on whether people will like the brand. So it's actually also nice to benchmark these things against each other. And family and togetherness is an important element because it does explain 5% of the variance, but compared to the other elements, it's just not as important.
Dr. J, we spoke about A B testing. We talked about KDA. We talked about everything on why it's important to do this research and test all these ads that are coming in Q4. We saw Q4 is always the ad galore, right? We're always ads everywhere, but we have no idea which ad is working, which ad is delivering the results. And now we know that with A B testing, with key driver analysis and multivariate testing, we're able to reap on that seasonality and really make sure that we're getting the most out of what's coming. Now, before we leave the session, I wanted to ask if you had any main takeaways for our audience here. What are some things they should keep with them from this webinar when they're thinking about Q4 and planning for Q4? What do you think?
Yes, so there are a lot of, I have 8 takeaways
Wow,
actually.
you've come prepared. You've seen
Yes,
me ask the previous guests, and you were like, I'm prepared.
yes, just recapitulating our journey. So the first takeaway is really like test your campaigns, test, test, test.
Mhm.
The second one would be define your research goals and KPIs first. Then let psychographics really guide the campaign, the design process of your campaigns throughout the entire year. Use A/B testing to compare your ads in terms of the core KPIs. Use key driver analysis to uncover why certain elements are more appealing. And you could also easily rerun key driver analysis at different stages of the year to figure out if participants are maybe paying attention to way different things towards Q4 than during the rest of the year. Here, maybe also things like gift giving could play a bigger role, for instance. So you can also combine psychographics with A/B testing and key driver analysis. This is something we could unfortunately not dive into anymore for the sake of time. And obviously, also, it's okay to reiterate this whole testing process if necessary, and maybe start with a semi-monadic test and then go into a more in-depth monadic test. And then it's also super important to track your campaigns for determining the campaign's success. And this is, I think, the perfect segue into next week's session with Vale.
That is so, so true. Thank you so much, Dr. J, for joining me in this session and telling us all about ad testing and how to do the best research to make the most use out of Q4. So far in this series, we've talked about psychographics, we've talked about pricing research, and right now you heard it here from Dr. J herself about advertising research. And our last installment of this journey that we've went on to be prepared for Q4 is going to be next Thursday, where we're going to talk about tracking and how to retain these customers that you've gained because of everything that we told you. So until then, if you have any questions, if you have any follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to Dr. J and I on LinkedIn. We're nerds. We always want to talk about research methods. So whatever you want to talk about, shoot us a message, shoot us an email. We'd be happy to answer. And until then, see you next week.
Thank you so much. It was a
Ciao,
pleasure.
ciao.